In this video, I will give you a UFO disclosure update for the month of May. In my previous video, I told you this month would be extremely revelatory and historical for UFO transparency. And boy, oh boy, are we off to a good start. Miraculous May is not disappointing. On April 30th, before the article was even published, I told you about a dark horse that was cited by journalist Lieutenant Tim McMillan. That dark horse published later in the day in the highly respected publication, The New Yorker, that actually began in the year 1925. This 13,000-word article mostly covered UFO history. There was one citation in it, however, that was a huge bombshell and something we've never heard before. Reid, the former Senate Majority Leader, was cited as saying that for decades he was told that the aerospace company Lockheed Martin had UFO crash retrieval materials in their possession, and that he tried to get classified approval by the Pentagon to have a look at the stuff they held, allegedly. As it turned out, the Pentagon would not approve his request and did not provide a reason for rejecting his request. Reid also explained that the reason he tried to get ATIP, that is Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, Special Access Program status, was so that they could take a look at the materials allegedly held by Lockheed to obviously gain a better understanding of the phenomena. And, well, that's my commentary on why they would want to do that. This nugget in The New Yorker began to make its rounds within mainstream media, including the Fox News show Fox and Friends. Here are two clips from that show that aired on May 2nd.
I have to ask you about this, Mr. McKinnon. I joked about this on the show yesterday, but I actually don't think it's a joke. I find it absolutely fascinating. I want to read you a quote from former Senator from Utah, Reid. He said this recently. He said, "I was told for decades that Lockheed had some of these retrieved materials. I tried to get, as I recall, a classified approval by the Pentagon to have me go look at the stuff. They would not approve that. I don't know all the numbers and what they were, what kind of classification it was, but they would not give that to me." That is on Lockheed having in their possession some UFO fragments that Senator Reid was trying to view. He couldn't get a hold of it. What can you tell us about this?
Well, it's interesting, Will, and again, ultimately, Harry Reid might have the last laugh on this, right? Because he's been talking about this for the last 20-plus years, and now you have a number of high-level U.S. officials that are starting to openly talk about it.
At the very least, this topic is moving from one of the realm of conspiracy to the realm of we need to know exactly what's going on here. Isn't that fair?
It is fair.
Host Will Kane makes a great point. This subject is no longer really embedded in the realm of fringe and is quickly reaching a new perception that is, instead of fringe or conspiracy, it's, wait a minute, why are all these government officials saying this is real if it's not? But let's move on. I want to talk about my initial assessment of the New Yorker article that published only days ago. I will admit that after I read the New Yorker article, I felt a little bit of underwhelmed. And I was not alone with that. There were other people in the Twitter sphere saying that there was too much hype for this article and they felt underwhelmed. And from my perspective, this assessment is emotional. And as we all know, our emotions can lead us astray. What I think is happening and has happened is that we have become extremely desensitized when it comes to the UFO subject. To illustrate my point, I think back to when To the Stars Academy had their press conference on October 11th, 2017, and there were all these high-level government officials, and there Steve Justice, who was the #2 guy at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and the former director of ATIP, Lue Elizondo, said behind the podium that it was in this position as director of ATIP that I learned the phenomena is indeed real. And I remember the impact that had upon me. And I also remember shortly after the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article that Commander David Fravor was doing an interview, and he talked about the extraordinary flight characteristics of the Tic Tac object that he said him and the 3 other aviators saw visually for over 5 minutes. And I remember thinking to myself, this is absolutely incredible that this is being aired on CNN. And so when I experienced that back then, I was not underwhelmed. I was amazed by what was going on. But now, 3.5 plus years later, we're in a situation where we have a former Senate Majority Leader telling us that he's been told for decades that Lockheed Martin has UFO crash retrieval material and that he tried to get access to it and he was denied by the Pentagon. And we're like, yeah, whatever. That's progress. That was progress, just as in May of 2019, Elizondo was on the Tucker Carlson show and was asked whether or not he believes that the U.S. government is in possession of UFO debris. Well, let's take a look at that historical moment.
So let me ask you one last question. Do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the U.S. government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these aircrafts?
I do, yes.
Do you think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in its possession right now?
Unfortunately, Tucker, I really have to be careful of my NDA. I really can't go into a lot of more detail than that.
Okay.
But simply put, yes.
And just as that was progress, there was further progress on July 28th, 2020. In particular, there was 2 articles written in the New York Times about UFO crash retrievals. In the second article, that was written by journalists Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, titled, "Do We Believe in UFOs? That's the Wrong Question," there was a very interesting excerpt underscoring that there are indeed officials within our own Department of Defense who believe that there have been retrievals of UFOs. Here's the excerpt. Numerous associates of the Pentagon program with high security clearances and decades of involvement with official UFO investigations told us they were convinced such crashes have occurred based on their access to classified information. But the retrieved materials themselves and any data about them are completely off limits to anyone without clearances and a need to know. In my estimation, and objectively speaking, a case has been building since the Roswell event that the United States government has in its possession somewhere retrieval of machines of unknown origin. And if you were to ask me, do I believe this is true or not, it depends on what hour you ask me. That will determine the nature of my answer, because I do struggle with this question. And I will tell you part of the reason I struggle with it is because I feel like having this fidelity of data, proving we are not alone and squirreling that away, and not revealing that to the rest of your fellow human beings is spiritually extremely problematic. I could understand classifying it temporarily as like a necessary evil for the sake of national security, but to do this indefinitely over many, multiple decades is something that strikes me as a complete overreaction and a detriment to human civilization. Speaking of building a case, on April 27th, the YouTube channel Dossier X001 interviewed Lue Elizondo, in which Elizondo said that there may be other cases beyond Roswell in which the United States has recovered UAP material, and that may be coming out soon. Here's the clip from that interview.
Let me first start with Roswell. So I want to make sure that I address your questions. Roswell, something happened. That's pretty clear. The details of what actually happened is still up for debate. But there was enough significance to that event or events that predicated an official U.S. response, and not just operationally, meaning the deployment of people, but for a recovery mission, but also from a public affairs PAO perspective, where they actually had put out some statements about what happened in Roswell. I obviously wasn't around for Roswell.
Me too.
I did see anecdotal information, but you said something that was the first time the U.S. government was engaged. And I'll share with you that may not necessarily be true.
Okay.
There may be anecdotal information that indicates that perhaps the U.S. government was involved even before that in purported recovery type activities.
You mean probably 42 in Los Angeles or something, or?
I don't want to elaborate yet. I think some information is going to come to light here probably pretty soon about some interesting incidents. Again, it's not up to me, and there's some people out there that are willing to come forward, I think.
In addition to this, and this was covered in the recent New Yorker article, briefly, scientists Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée are working on analyzing materials reportedly recovered from unidentified aerial phenomena of unknown origin. And they intend to submit their findings for peer review. So what does this all boil down to? Well, from my assessment, this boils down to the notion that every quote-unquote secret has a shelf life. It is impossible for a secret to persist indefinitely. And, just as a case has been made over time that the U.S. government has acquired exotic materials stemming from machines of unknown origin, undoubtedly the case has been being made over a long stretch of time, many decades, that there are unidentified aerial phenomena in our skies and also detected by sonar and other surveillance systems in our seas. This has been going on a very long time, and these are of unknown origin. So I would submit to you that if in another 10 years from today, all we have is this buzz, and there's nothing definitive at all that comes to the fore, then the assessment that this is all smoke and no fire will have a whole lot of credibility, in my opinion. But I would not bet my money there. I would place my bet on, without question, the U.S. government at least has acquired sensor data proving, not only beyond a reasonable doubt, but scientifically proving that we are not alone. Now, as far as the question of have we attained materials, I think it does seem that way. But I'm going to let it all play out and see where this goes. Christoph on Twitter alerted me to some very interesting tweets by the journalist Tim McMillan of the Debrief outlet. Tim has given some predictions, or given a prediction, that there's going to be a country in Europe that is going to aggressively involve itself on the UFO issue. Elizondo has also referenced the UN before. The best I can say is there are definitely indications that this disclosure process is going to escalate in a more transnational fashion, well beyond the borders of the United States. Anyways, here are McMillan's tweets. On November 19th, 2020, McMillan writes, "My way too early 2021 prediction. A dark horse European country emerges and steals the global UAP stage." And then 3 months later, Christoph follows up. "By the way, did you get any confirmation and clarity from Space Command? Also, do you still see a European dark horse emerging on this topic?" McMillan: "I do, but not until September at the earliest. More likely November when the UN General Assembly meets." I obviously can't speak to the veracity of McMillan's predictions, but he's a very good source, as is Lue Elizondo. And Elizondo very recently said something highly provocative to Stephen Greenstreet of the New York Post. And this comes from an interview that was published only days ago. Stephen Greenstreet asks, "Is there anything you could share with me without breaking or breaching your NDA that you haven't shared with anyone else?" Lue Elizondo responds, "Pay attention for the next 30 days. I think this conversation is about to get real interesting." Now I'm going to cover something that I don't usually cover. In fact, I don't think I've ever covered it. I consider it very dark. I don't like what my government is doing to Lue Elizondo and indirectly to the American people. It appears that there are factions within the United States government or the Department of Defense, maybe very few people, I don't know, but they're trying to discredit Lue Elizondo. And by doing that, they're trying to discredit, whether intentionally or not, the UFO subject. So I find it very, very dark and unpleasant. But instead of trying to explain this, well, let me put it this way. This has been going on a long time. This is nothing new, but I'm going to share with you the latest iteration of it. Gotti Schwartz, journalist for NBC. Today, when asked if Elizondo ran ATIP, a Pentagon spokesperson said, quote, Luis Elizondo had no assigned responsibilities for the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, while he was assigned to the Office of the Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. Omega Point responds, hey, Gotti NBC, I love the coverage, but Elizondo is who he says he is. People like Silver Record have been covering this from the get-go when he came out in 2017. Ask Senator Harry Reid if he is who he says he is. Gotti Schwartz responds, we did. The senator concurs. And here is the letter from the senator that Gotti Schwartz dropped on Twitter, dated April 26, 2021, to whom it may concern. As the United States Senate Majority Leader, I worked with Republican Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska and Democratic Senator Dan Inouye of Hawaii to secure $22 million of funding for what would become known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, an unclassified but unpublicized investigatory effort dedicated to studying unidentified aerial phenomena. As one of the original sponsors of ATIP, I can state as a matter of record Lue Elizondo's involvement and leadership role in this program. Mr. Elizondo is a former intelligence officer who has spent his career working tirelessly in the shadows on sensitive national security matters, including investigating UAPs as the head of ATIP. He performed these duties admirably. Sincerely, Harry Reid. Now here's Elizondo responding to the latest iteration of the DOD spokesperson saying that he had no involvement in ATIP. And this comes from the UFO show, The Basement Office, run by Stephen Greenstreet of the New York Post. Also, Nick Pope is often on the show. And this interview was already cited earlier. And I'm going to give you a link to the playlist of this show because it is actually one of the finest UFO shows, not just on YouTube, but anywhere.
I suspect between you and me and now your audience that, if the Pentagon continues on that line of narrative, will probably be a big mistake for them. There's enough people now in the Pentagon and on the Hill that know exactly who I was and what I did. And, it's going to continue to hurt their credibility. But that's...
I couldn't agree more with Elizondo. If the Pentagon does not get their act together and keeps with this clearly false narrative, it's not going to make Elizondo look bad. It's going to make the Pentagon look bad. I mean, we've already had, and I just showed you an example, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid vouch for who Elizondo is. We had Dr. Eric Davis and Dr. Hal Puthoff vouch for him, and they were part of the ATIP program. We've also had the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Chris Mellon, vouch for Elizondo. And Chris Mellon, at one point, was I think he was the third highest ranking person for intelligence in the entire Pentagon. And while Elizondo was director of ATIP, Mellon actually visited him in the Pentagon at his office. Mellon was able to get a ticket to do so because of his connections. So at this point, it's just common sense that Elizondo is who he said he was. And if the Pentagon continues this narrative, it doesn't really bode well for anybody, and no one's really going to win. Well, except maybe people who want to claim that the U.S. government is trying to cover up the UFO subject. Speaking of a cover-up, George Knapp made a fascinating comment on December 26, 2017, days after the release of the December 16th, 2017 New York Times bombshell article that basically started this whole thing. And it was made on the Earth Files Linda Moulton Howe show. And I'll give you a link to that because it's on YouTube. This is him basically saying how some people are responding, as far as I understand, to the December 16th, 2017 New York Times bombshell article. There are people inside government now who are freaking out about this, who are opposed to the release of the UFO information. Not necessarily because they worry about the public going crazy buying guns and blowing up all social institutions, that might be a concern, but because they worry about their own culpability, about the lies that they have told, about money that's been stashed into secret programs that should have gone somewhere else, about the taxpayers getting outraged. A little bit later, he goes on to explain. There are a range of motives for why people don't want this disclosure to happen. Some are worried that they are going to go to jail. Some are worried that it's the devil. Some just don't want the public to know, or they've got friends in industry, or they're worried that the Russians and the Chinese might find out what we're up to. There's a range of reasons. In this same light, I want to share with you a quote by journalist George Knapp that he articulated days ago during a roundtable that I was involved in on the Mystery Wire YouTube channel. I'll link below that roundtable that I had with host George Knapp and a bunch of other very articulate and intelligent people. Here's what George Knapp had to say about these quote-unquote last days as it pertains to the UFO cover-up. And this graphic was made by Danny Silva of the silvarecord.com. It is a really exciting time. I never thought I would see it coming. We're a lot closer than we've ever been, but expect pushback. There's going to be some serious pushback, and the closer we get to the goodies, the real goodies, not files, not just videos, but the good stuff, the worse it's going to be, because the keepers of the secrets who've had this stuff for a long time are not going to want to give it up. George Knapp. When George says goodies, I think he's referencing materials that have been recovered that are being housed in aerospace companies under contract of the United States government. Those would represent the absolute pinnacle of fidelity and proving we're not alone, but they would also represent a level of technology that the U.S. government would want to keep as classified as humanly possible. Because the bottom line is, the first nation that is able to duplicate this technology that is observed all around the world and nobody knows the origin of it is going to have a decisive advantage over every other nation. Because we are talking about technology that can go from a standstill to hypersonic velocity, that is capable of transmedium travel, that is going from the air into the water seamlessly. Low observability, very difficult for radar systems to get a good signature of these things, and on it goes. In other words, if a nation state had this technology, there's no one on this planet that would mess with them, period. It is extremely rare that I crack open a beer on camera, but tomorrow is May 4th, and you're watching this video, hopefully, and we are in the beginning of Miraculous May. And I've never heard chatter like I've heard recently about the outcome of this month as it pertains to historical occurrences that represent UFO transparency. So this one's for you. Miraculous May, everybody. Special thanks to all my YouTube members and patrons. Without you, I literally could not do this show. See you in the next episode.